Hello, I'm Dr. Brenda Harris, and I'm going to be talking to you a little bit today about racial identity development and models of racial identity development. And some of you might be wondering, well, what do I care about a racial identity development? When you look at me, you might say, I think this is a woman. This is someone who appears to be white. You can probably hear that I am a primary English speaker, and I do speak Spanish as a second language, but I'm not a balanced bilingual. So when you look at me and you listen to how I speak, you probably don't realize it, but in your head, you're formulating all kinds of ideas based on your past experiences about what you might know or think about me. So for example, I live in Alabama, and sometimes when I go into a building and someone holds a door for me, if it's someone that I identify as a man, they might say, um, here you go. Go ahead, and they let me pass through first. Well, our society has kind of taught us these rules about how we should interact and act in relation to each other, and we're socialized from the time we're really little about how we should do that. So we don't always think about what we're doing or what we're thinking, um, and why that might be important. Our brains are really amazing because our senses are taking in all kinds of data all of the time, and our brains are able to filter out what we need to pay attention to and what maybe we can just let go. Like, I don't know if you can hear it, maybe if my microphone is picking it up, but my clock in the other room is playing a song because we're at the top of the hour. So I'm focusing on you and making this video for you. So I did hear it in the background. My ears were picking up that sound, but my brain was just dismissing it until I thought, oh, this might be a good example. So think about if you were walking in Utah and you were on Fiddler's Canyon Trail, and suddenly a bear walks across the trail. So you probably, even though your nose might be smelling some flowers blooming, your brain would be filtering that out and telling you, danger, danger. You need to get yourself safe because a bear can, cause harm, even death. So our brains do all of these things, and they create shortcuts for us. Sometimes, though, our shortcuts can limit people's life chances. So, for example, in the United States, there's still a gender glass ceiling as far as we still, unlike many countries in the world, we haven't had a US president who identifies as female yet. We haven't had one that identifies as transgender either. So many countries around the world have had women presidents for or leaders for generations now, but we haven't done that. If you look around at high status positions and jobs, you do see women starting to break into some, but by and far, you see that a lot of positions you either have women or minoritized people as the first ones in those positions, or they're held by more traditionally what we would expect would be someone who identifies as white and male. So sometimes we think about people and we get to know them in a certain way, we expect certain things from them. And sometimes that's a blinder for us where we're kind of limiting what we expect and what we see and even hear from them because we have them in these kind of boxes. And we say, oh, well, Asian descent people are bad drivers, so they're good at math. So let's say that you're a teacher and you look at Tron and you're like, what, Asian descent? And you don't even think about it consciously, but you're like, well, he's good at math. And so you skip right over him. So sometimes with leadership positions as well, people maybe don't realize it, but they're interviewing and they talk it over as a group and they don't even realize it, but they um are identifying people that they resonate with, a leader, and those are characteristics that we tend to see as assertive, a go-getter, a hard worker. And so we tend to see those as good qualities in somebody who identifies as a man, or we identify them as a man. And then if it's a woman, and we say assertive, well, sometimes, that can kind of be dicey. We have words for women who seem assertive. One word that comes to my mind, women that are seen as maybe assertive, that would be a word that rhymes with witch, right? And so with women, it kind of tends to backfire on them. And we don't always even think about these consciously, they're just at the back of our mind. And identities are like that. We look at people and we make presumptions. Now, my husband, you probably can tell from some of the pictures here, he's African American. And you aren't gonna, if you meet him, you're not gonna say, I wonder if he's black. I mean, you're just gonna see it and you're gonna say, he's black. And he would be someone who would tell you, I'm black and I'm proud. And so there's a song that has that as the title. And and he would tell you that he's a very good dancer. And so he tends to like to embrace some stereotypes and kind of make them his own and play with that what people expect from him. But he spent a career in management and in upper management as an engineer at a major oil company. And so oftentimes people are surprised that he golfs. When he wears a hat that has a well-known golf symbol on it, people look at it like, is that your hat? And he'll be like, well, what, you think black people don't golf? And so our the way that we understand each other is based on what we see about people's bodies. And in the United States, we tend to be less patient with people that we perceive to be elderly. Our society focuses on youth and we glamorize youth, and young children and the elderly don't contribute really to the economy, and so they tend to have a devalued place in our society. And when we hear English in a accent that we don't perceive as native to the United States, then we often make assumptions. Are they legal, illegal? And these things just happen because we're taking in these narratives and images about people around us and groups so that it's like the air that we breathe, and then they just pop into our minds, whether we know it or not. But we can learn to be very conscious of it. So identities are important because they give our brains like a shortcut to knowing how to interact with somebody. We do interact with people differently based on their age, their status. If it's my boss, right? I'm not going to be telling some kind of iffy jokes. I'm going to change my language. I don't speak like I might at an evening party on the weekend on the beach or at a club the way I would in a board meeting, right? It's a different register. And so we speak with people and interact with them based on what we assume and look at as their identities. And like, for example, did you know that I identify as a woman? You might have said, well, that's a pretty good guess, but how do you know that? How do you know that? What is it that really tells you about that? When my youngest son was just a toddler, and I would take him shopping, grocery shopping with me, he loved to go at the checkout counter where they have all the candy bars and little goodies that little people like to toss into the cart so that the adults have to pay for them. And so my little one was starting to make a lot of noise. And he wanted something. And so I said, okay, you know, put it up on the counter, give it to the man. I give it to the and I looked at the person and I just out of the corner of my eye, because I'm focusing on my child, I couldn't really assess whether I thought it was a man. And then I thought, no, I think that the cues I was getting was maybe this is a woman. And so I was like having a little mini crisis because I had started to say man, but I wasn't sure if it was a man. And, now I think about it, and maybe they didn't even identify in the binary of man or woman, maybe that was someone who preferred to be um, a two-spirit person and they want to be a they. So, I was putting all of this on them just based on looks, and I didn't know how to handle it when I wasn't sure. So, if you think about it, this is what the way that uh identities work. And even if we don't always like to admit it, like think about if you have met someone, like I know when I was in South America, I sometimes it was really hard for me because I wasn't used to seeing so many people that didn't have a lot of their teeth and they would be so young. And I know that there's a lot of economic and access to resources and healthcare that happen and don't happen. But it was very hard for me because I kind of had this idea that you know reasonable people would have all of their teeth if they're young. So if you think about it, you probably have been in situations like that too, and it will pop up when you're least expecting it. But that's because our brain is thinking about people's identities, whether we know it or not. And then the way we act on them is informed by how we interpret their identities. Now, you probably might be still saying, well, I don't care. I just don't care. But you would care if I was your boss, and you would care if I was your professor and I was giving you a grade. You would care very much if I thought that I looked at your identity and I was like, well, this person doesn't pull their pants up all the way. This person just rolls out of bed and is sleepy and cruddy face and everything. And so I don't even know, clearly they don't care about themselves. And so if you don't care about you, I don't care about you. And you're not going to be very happy if I'm making all these assumptions about you and I can give you a grade, or I'm your boss, or I'm the one who's going to sign your loan for your loan to buy your home or get your new car or whatever it is. If I'm in a position of authority or anybody's in a position of authority, um, they can really limit your life chances, or you could do that to someone else. Let's say you're a police officer or you're a social worker. We know that this happens because um, minoritized children, particularly Black children, are taken out of homes at 400 times the rate that white children are taken out of homes. Is this because white parents are so much better than Black parents? No, right? So we know that rates of child abuse, rates of drug addiction, these things are pretty similar across groups when you account for socioeconomic class and education, pretty much pretty equal. So it's not that the parenting is so much different, but how the social workers and teachers and police officers go in and they're using their lens about people's identity and they're making assumptions. So oftentimes teachers, for example, if it's Jamal and Jamal's acting up, they might think, and it's not necessarily conscious. They're thinking, well, Jamal, here he is, this little budding criminal, and he's, headed from the school to the prison pipeline. But if it's David, we might say, well, boys will be boys. And if Susie is indigenous and you know that her family is of the Dene Nation, the Navajo nation, then you're like, aren't the Navajo, aren't they quiet? But Cindy is so chatty. And so sometimes stereotypes will play into it, and we're thinking, well, you know, uh, they're not fitting in this box, and it matters with how we interact with people, particularly if we're in a position of authority. So how do we develop these identities? That's kind of my focus here today, and I'm going to share with you the story of my identity development. And I do identify as a woman. I do identify as being white. And that's usually how people identify me. And as a professor, oftentimes, because I have a fairly high pitched voice, people often, students and other faculty, particularly other faculty who are men, often have low expectations for me. When I have had research grants and been at meetings about applying for different grants, I've literally had a male faculty member tell me that he didn't know why I was there because I probably was more interested in accessorizing my shoes and purse, which I do like to do that. But I also am very serious about research. So, but he kind of devalued accessorizing and put that as kind of a silly, some woman with a high pitched voice must have nothing in their heads. And so he was definitely, fortunately, he wasn't evaluating my research application, and he didn't have anything to do about whether I kept my job or not. Because he definitely had low expectations for me based on what he saw my body as. So, how did I learn to become white? This changes over time. Even the category of being white has not always existed. Different amounts of melanin have existed in human beings' skin tones, and tones have been different, but what is the meaning to that? Even the idea of being white has not been around that long. The notion of race itself is only about 500 years old. So people in different societies saw different amounts of melanin in people's skin, and they noticed it and they were curious about it, but it wasn't necessarily racialized. So, and to the idea of being Black is also fairly new. Um, and so, how do we learn to be Black? How do we learn to be a woman? How do we learn to be white? Okay. And that will tell us a lot. Especially in the United States, we think about ourselves as individuals, like I am Brenda Harris. There's just one me, thankfully, and I'm as unique and special as they come, and so are you, right? So true. But we're also members of groups, and what we think and how we interact is very much based on our group and our the time period that we live in, and also what our status is. If we live in a middle class neighborhood, if we're born into a working class family, if you were born in the United States as compared to, say, Taiwan, things like that. So all of those things do matter. And so we have to learn we learn to do that. So a lot of times people in the United States in particular don't believe that. And they think, no, I make up my own mind. Other people think these things, but not me. I go my own way. And yet they're the people who are like out to buy designer jeans, right? They want Hoka's for shoes, or maybe an Apple Watch or something like that, because now everybody wants an Apple Watch. Well, maybe not everybody, but a lot of people do, and have iPhones and Hoka shoes, so on. So a lot of times people believe, well, that that's their original idea, that's their taste, their preference. And sure it is, but those are influenced by society. If you have spent any time in South America, for example, as I have, you will know that their sense of beauty for women is slightly different. We're in the United States. We like we like women to be, generally, we like them to be blonde, blue-eyed, and very thin. That's the norm in the United States of what's considered beautiful. So you might say, no, it's not. But if you look in magazines, if you look in, on TV and movies and so on, but what's kind of presented as beautiful, you will see that that is so. And so even though you have your own preferences for sure, you as an individual are influenced by the larger groups that are around you, the society that you're born in. So many times I hear people say, well, my family didn't own slaves. And they think that they're the first one that has said that. Or they'll say, well, my best friend is black. And I wish I had even a nickel for how many times people tell me that. So they think that these are the first time that this has been said, but really it's not. Like, we tend to have patterns in how we learn to interact and act, and what we say and don't say in different situations. When I was due to have my first baby, he was overdue. It was July, very hot, and he was overdue. And I was getting irritated because so many people would say to me, no baby yet. And it was like, if one more person says that to me, I am really going to scream, because does it look like there's a baby yet? And so I was having a hard time being patient with that, because how would they know, right? So just from looking, they might not know, but I had heard that so many times because people would say that to me so often. So we do have patterns in how we act. We are social creatures as human beings. We like to think of ourselves as individuals, and we are individual, but we're also very much influenced by groups and our families. And that's how we learn to be our different identities, as we learn it at home, in our communities, and in our groups. So what I'm going to do is I would like to share with you some models of different frameworks for thinking about identity development. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen here with you. And I'm just going to show you just kind of real quickly what some of these different models are. Like this one is the Hardiman-Jackson Identity Development. And you can read their work, Dr. Hardiman and Dr. Bailey Jackson. They have written books about this. So these models that they have different steps and stages. And I like theirs because you can look at it here, and they are comparing minoritized people and white people. And then you have these different stages. Now, I use the models, and models are intended as like heuristics. What a heuristic is a tool. So I'm not trying to mold myself into their tool, but I'm trying to use their tool to make sense of how you see these patterns of how people learn to be their different identities. And in the United States, race is a very key factor. It's never Race is never not an issue in the United States, and globally too, but the United States, we don't really make a distinction in the United States between ethnicity and race. We collapse them together, even though they are different. So you can be Black and not African American, right? So there's different cultural differences and group dynamics depending on which ethnic group it is. And then the racial category would be Black. So this is the category that they have. And you can Google this, you'll find it on Google Scholar. And so I like theirs because it has a comparison. This is Janet Helms's White Racial Identity Development, and I have used this one a lot with my own students. I have worked in teacher education for a long time, and most teachers, the teaching population in the United States, even in the end of 2023, is still over 88% white and mostly women. And so this identity development model is something that I have found useful. And so these stages here, it's kind of like, think about any kind of these stages in either the Hardiman and Jackson model or this model, Helms. The stages are kind of like, think about the stages of grief. Have you heard about that? So if you think about the stages of grief, you know, it's just a way of thinking about and a helpful tool to say kind of what the process is that a lot of people grieving kind of move through over time. It doesn't mean that everybody has the same process or that it's feels and looks the same for everybody, but it's a tool for kind of generally understanding and making sense about that process. And you'll see, I'll show you my racial identity development, and then you will see, how yours is the same or different. And for me, sometimes I skipped categories, sometimes I came back to categories. It wasn't necessarily always in this order. So the helpfulness of a tool like a model is that you can see how it works or doesn't work for you. So you're kind of putting your experiences and using it as a tool to make sense of your understandings. So you're not necessarily trying to fit yourself into that rigid model, but you're using it as a heuristic to kind of make sense of what's happening to you. Okay, and so this one is for white racial identity. And of course, not everybody identifies or is identified as white. And a lot of times, people don't really realize this, but it does make sense that people of color would have a different racial identity development than white people do because of how our society and our history and our world is set up and where we are in time and place. So, you'll see for my racial identity development, I was like most white people are what I would call late bloomers to understanding about race. As someone who's white, I did not have to learn about race, and everyone around me was white. So even though that is racial, I didn't think about that as race. I thought about it as normal. And then when I became a mother of children who could not pass as white, and my children were in preschool and came home from school, my third son came home and was trying to wash his brown skin off. He was 3 and he was already thinking about race. He might not have had the words and vocabulary that I did as an adult, but he certainly was getting a message that his skin was the wrong color. And if you think about it, it wasn't necessarily that his teachers were bad people or the bus driver, and they didn't like call him racial slurs, things like that. Even though his name is Marcelo Juarez, they didn't, say anything bad and presume that he was illegal or something like that. But he got a message as he was looking around at everyone, and he was like, I seem to be the odd one out here. And he might not have been able to articulate it, but maybe the stories his teacher was reading, the bus driver, the lunch lady, like all of these adults around him did not look like him. And so he was like, I must be the wrong color. So he was very young and already having experiences with that, where I was already a young adult. And I could possibly have lived most, if not all of my life without having to address race at all. I could have maybe just been someone who is like, oh, that's those people. They talk about it, but it's not real. It became very real to me because my children's bodies were signaling to other people. And even I became a teacher of children who could not pass as white. And when I would take them on field trips, people would assume that when the leather jacket went missing, they came right straight for us, thinking that we had taken their leather jacket, because this was the only group around that didn't pass as white. So they had assumptions about that. So these things definitely matter. So here you have a really handy handout where they're talking about different groups' racial identity development. Now, this one here is about American Indian identity development, and then Asian American identity development. That makes sense that they would be different, right? You think about Asian descent peoples in the United States, there's still often their families have been here for generations and they're still seen as the strangers. There's all kinds of stereotypes that are associated with Asian descent peoples. And being Black, that is something that is foundational to U.S. society, where our continuum in the United States was racialized as Black and white. And of course, you had stolen land, which was indigenous, but because the indigenous nations were subjected to a mass genocide where you had 90% of groups just wiped out with, you know, uh, different diseases and hunger and war and such. Um, and then others were put on not really prime real estate, right? So they're kind of pushed off of the central stage, and then you have chattel slavery going on. So you have stolen labor for 244 plus years, and then 100 years of Jim Crow racial segregation. So you have, a bulk of US history is racialized right there. And so that's when you start the notion of being white develops. It wasn't something that came to us from Europe, because you had things like Christian, not Christian. You had the Northern Europeans who didn't necessarily like the people who were from Italy, the Irish, so on. And so, but then they kind of become lumped together, and this category of white emerges. And so it makes sense that there would be a racial category, a racial identity development model for minoritized people. And probably the classic example, which is a lot like my young son's example, would be Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois. So he was the first African American to receive his PhD, and he graduated from Harvard. And so he grew up in Massachusetts, and in his pre-encounter time, this was where he wasn't really thinking about race. He was a little kid, and you know how little kids are. Their world is mom, dad, or whoever's raising them, their family. And so they're not really thinking outside of that little area. And so when little W.E.B. Du Bois goes to school, he's very precocious, and he's in school as an elementary student. And it's Valentine's Day, and there's a little white child there in the school, because they do have a few Black children, but he's very precocious, so he's kind of this token there. And it's mostly white students. And this little girl who's white, she won't give him a Valentine. And she's like, nope, not you. And he's shocked about that. So this was his encounter. He was like, whoops. Um, he learns that he's different, that he's Black. And he understands from that scenario, and others, as he's becoming more and more aware of his surroundings, that is not considered a good thing. That happens fairly early for him, like it does oftentimes for minoritized people. They learn pretty quickly that race is very real in their lives. These are different models for racial identity development. So let me just stop sharing that screen, or I'm going to minimize that now, and I want to introduce to you my own racial identity development. And of course, since I identify as white and other people identify me as white, I'm going to use the white racial identity development model, because that fits how my body presents. Okay. So I'm just going to take you through this to kind of show you how my racial identity developed, and the kind of the stages that I went through. So I call my racial identity development on becoming a white social misfit. And I'll explain that a little bit. White racial identity development, and this is my story. Okay. So to understand it, the first category in white racial identity development in this particular model is acceptance of the status quo. So this is like the pre-encounter for minoritized people. So I'm my parents' little sweetie, and I'm born in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and I just accept the status quo around me because I don't know anything else. I'm just a kid. I'm just normal, and sometimes I see people who don't look like me, but you know how little kids are. Sometimes in the grocery store, they might say, "Look at that lady," and they might say something like that, and you're like, don't talk like that. We don't say things like that. Or sometimes they notice that somebody doesn't walk on two legs and maybe they're in a chair. And so kids will point that out. And we're socialized to not say anything like that. But so, I'm just like, I don't pay any attention to that at all. And so this is me. And I was just the cutest little chubby baby, and I was born in Upper Michigan, right by the Canadian border. And it is a predominantly white area. And I did not know this because I was a little kid. And it wasn't until many years later and kind of learning about the history of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, I did not know that the reason that it is so white up there is that after the Civil War, when chattel slavery was ended, previously enslaved Black people went everywhere in the United States except for like two counties. And one of those counties, I believe, is in the Northwest, and I forget where the other county is, but it wasn't in Upper Michigan. So, you did have Black people going up there, but the reason that it's overwhelmingly white, even still today, is because white people violently ran the anybody who was Black out of town. And to this day, when I meet people from Detroit, for example, and I tell them that I was born in the Upper Peninsula, and so therefore I'm a Youper, then they back away from me if they're Black, because they know that even today, if you go hunting and fishing up in the Upper Peninsula, you do run the risk of somebody telling you to get the hell out of there if you're not white. And so there's a tradition of keeping it white. Well, I was a little kid. What did I know, right? I didn't know any of this. And so these are my grandparents and my brother and my sisters. And this is me right here. I'm the oldest one out of seven kids. And we just lived on a farm. My parents moved down to Green Bay, Wisconsin, still pretty white, and farmed there. My neighbors were white. Everybody in my school was white. My dad was a truck driver. This is actually my brother, but my brother became the next generation of truck drivers. And so we had this little farm, and my dad was a truck driver, so my mom stayed home with us as kids, and we I milked a cow. We had a cow, and we had horses, and we had some sheep. Um and some pigs. And so this is my third grade class, and this is me. And you notice that, this is all white people here. So I was in the fourth grade before I had any idea that that this wasn't normal. And especially if you go to Green Bay, you're gonna drive on Oneida Avenue, and you are going to drive through Menominee Falls. I didn't even know that these were indigenous nations that had been there before white people. And so I didn't know. And in fact, I went to Kewanee High School, which we were the Kiwani Indians. I don't know, that was in the 80s. I don't know if they changed their mascot or not, but I had no idea because everybody around me was white and nobody talked about this. So I didn't know. I never questioned it, nothing. And why would I, right? Because everybody and everything looked like me. So I didn't really go through this next stage of it's not my fault. I didn't go through that. I knew that Kiwani, where I went to high school, was the name of an indigenous nation that no longer is alive. They were wiped out. So I mean, I was like, I didn't do it. I wasn't even born. So I didn't really get defensive. Like sometimes when white people learn about racism, they'll be like, I didn't do it. I didn't own a slave. But that wasn't me. I didn't really go through that category. And maybe because everybody around me was white, so I knew that indigenous people um had lived in Wisconsin, but I didn't know that they still did. And so I really did not know anything about that. And nobody told me about it. So I just kind of grew up, riding my horse. That's my dog, Oliver. We lived out in the country. I didn't really, I knew that, sometimes people had wrongs done to them, but I didn't know anything about like systemic racism or white privilege. I didn't know anything about that because nobody talked about it around me. So the next category is denial. So with the first one, you don't see anything, and then kind of this defensive, well, it wasn't me. And then when you're encountering this idea that not all groups and people are treated the same, then white people will go through this as, well, I'm an individual. Maybe other white people did that, but I didn't. This is me and I'm me and I didn't do that. So this category also, like the last category, this didn't really work for me. I wasn't like that. I don't know why, but I wasn't defensive. I didn't deny anything. Maybe because I didn't really understand how deep inequities are and were. So I don't know why, but I didn't. So for me, I went more through instead of denial, I was more in a category like fascination. I encountered differences like I was in the 5th grade, and the first time that I heard Spanish, and I was just mesmerized as I didn't know what they were saying. And so these people that my social studies teacher brought to our school, and they were speaking to each other in Spanish. I couldn't understand anything, but it made these beautiful sounds to my ears. And I was like, I want to learn that language. So when I got to high school, I made friends with the foreign exchange students. I even dated the foreign exchange student. And I just was kind of like, I liked something that was different. And so, that my parents, my teachers kind of felt that I was a little bit odd, a little bit different. And I was in college and I did something my own way anyway. I went to South America, and I know you probably don't know this, but this is me right here. And I was in Argentina. And so I got married down there, and I stayed down there. And I was kind of the odd one out. And so this was kind of the beginning of my introduction to that maybe, what was normal to me was not normal to everybody. So, with clarification of whiteness, for a lot of white people, they get mad when you say, you're white. There's such a thing as white privilege. And they think, well, no, I worked hard. I don't have any privileges. But that's kind of the whole point, is like, because I'm white, people don't assume that I'm going to shoplift. In fact, I might shoplift right in front of them, and they might say, well, that's probably hers anyway. She's going to pay for it later or whatever. Where if I was black, they might be going, okay, that really was mine, but they're assuming that I took it. So we know that happens because people of color are arrested at much higher rates for simply shopping while black, driving while black, so there's clearly, like, you can pass and get service and everything much easier if you're white. And it also matters, if you're a woman, what size your body is. After I had my sixth kid, I was really heavy for a while. And the way people treated me when I was a size 18 as compared to a size 10 is very, very different. So I can tell you that it matters if you're a female as well as if you're white, and what your body looks like. So for me, I didn't really get mad about being white. And I wasn't really ashamed to be white. Like, I know some particularly white women will want to, like, one white young woman asked Malcolm X, what can I do? How can I help? And he told her nothing, because white people, he saw white people as devils when before he went on his sojourn outside of the United States. And when he came back, he was like, he had seen people from all backgrounds who were Islamic, and he saw that they got together really well, and that race was a little bit different. But then he was murdered, so he never really got a chance to develop that. So, um, that young lady was when she asked Malcolm X that, she wanted to help. She saw that the things were inequitable, and it mattered if you were black, so she wanted to help. And so sometimes people do, and they'll will say, I wish I was black. There's even cases of white women who've been in the news, like, within the last 5-10 years, and they have been pretending that they're black, and then they've actually, like, been a chapter head of NAACP or something, and come to find out they're actually white. So some people who are white are sometimes like, they're like, woo, all this racism is real, and I'm so embarrassed to be white. I did not really go through that either. I was more outraged because I was a mother and a teacher, and my students and my children were always being held back because they didn't pass as white. So I didn't really experience being ashamed of white. I try to use my benefits of being white to intervene for my children. So when I would go to the school, I wouldn't call on the phone and say, "Hi, this is Brenda Juarez." I would say, I would go over there so that they could see my body. And then my name, Brenda Juarez, wasn't as much of a factor because you could see my white body. Um, and now, with my name being Brenda Harris, that passes right as European. I don't get any second glances about that. So, by this time, I'm learning more about it, and these are my children, and when they were little, and people would always think that they were from Mexico, and these are some of my students who really were from Mexico. And they were from other parts of the world too. I had some students from Vietnam. So this young lady, her family was from Tonga. So I had students from all over, and that informed how I thought about uh about race, and I didn't really have time to be embarrassed or shamed or upset about being white because I was constantly, this was one of my classes that I would take to the library, and a lot of the children were first generation immigrants from Mexico. They were economic refugees. And my assistant was from Argentina. She was also an immigrant. And so we were constantly being accused of shoplifting and everything else. So, but they knew that people were looking at them that way. So we didn't, we were always vigilant about not letting anyone think that we were in the at all. Your hands are visible all the time. So we had to deal a lot with people's perceptions of the children. Um, so I had a lot of, the next stage is acceptance of self, like I'm white, my group is white. Um, and Now this one was a little bit of a hard category for me, and I think I've gone back and forth with this one over the years in different ways. Because I have some very good friends that I went to graduate school. This is my very good friend, Dr. Hayes. And so he and I both taught school in Salt Lake City School District at the same time. And so we went to graduate school, and he would often say things like, "What's the deal with your people, Brenda?" And I did sometimes feel uncomfortable and a little bit upset, even when it was like, well, why do they have to be my people? So I guess maybe I was kind of going back into that, being a little bit ashamed of being white. And I really had to grapple with that because I did kind of want a good white people medal. And and so I had to kind of learn to uh, understand that I wasn't exceptional, that, I'm just another person, and I do have the same group background as other white people, and I've actually had opportunities to learn more about things than many other white people have. So I feel like, more should be expected of me. So I kind of struggled with this one. I wanted to be exceptional, and I had to learn to kind of deal with that. I'm not really exceptional. I'm me, but I'm not better or worse than any other white people. So, and this was when we were living in Alabama. And so we were now living in a predominantly Black neighborhood. And so we stood out all the time because my kids didn't pass as white. And but we were clearly not Black. So Malcolm X would say, it's not about segregation or integration, but about being fully human. And I feel like that's a really important saying because sometimes we're like, okay, well, I'm going to be in my group. Let's have just white people or just women or just whatever your religious group is. Like, I'm Catholic, just the Catholics. But when you start peeling back the layers of any identity group, you're going to have a lot of intra-group differences, right? So even though I'm part of the group that is white women, there's many things that are similar about white women, but there's also a lot of intra-group differences too. So just segregating, even if you say, well, let's have just women. Well, like, how do you draw the line between uh woman and not woman, right? That line actually gets a little blurry because you have people who are not only two-spirit people, but also you have people who have been born with the genitalia of both male and female. So, so it's not really that simple of, we're going to segregate, we're going to have just this group and everybody else is on the out group. And then if we're trying to integrate everybody into this like magical color blind mess, well then, we're actually saying, just like we say we're gonna study history. Well, we wouldn't need Black history or women's history if we had history included everyone. But when we have history, it means his story, right? It's about men, about the winners, about people who wrote the story, them about themselves. So the other groups have been left out. So when we think about integrating, then it's like, well, I don't really want to be integrated into you. I want to be me. And so Malcolm X was saying, well, it's not really about segregation or integration. It's about being fully human. Can you accept me the way I am as fully human without putting this norm of this is how we speak. If we say you're speaking too loud, like who decided that? Like that the register should be a little quieter. Who decided that? So why am I speaking too loud? We often think about people who are working classes being too loud. They're in public and they're too loud. Well, who decided that? Like where is that written on some rocks on the mountain or some scrolls that came out of the sea? And so who decided that? Maybe we could just, value being fully human. Could you see me for what I am? I don't want you to not see me, to pretend that you don't see differences about me. Because if you don't notice that I do identify as a woman, I don't know who you're looking at. I don't know who you're talking to because this is me. Can you just accept me without pretending that you don't see my race, that you don't hear my voice, that you don't see my body size? Can you accept me and then value me for whatever size my body is and for however I ambulate around, you know? So that's what he meant by that. So this was our wedding picture, and you can tell that when I got our pictures developed, everybody thought that they were very surprised that this is my family. And these are our neighbors who were at our wedding, and everyone assumed that these were my parents, but they are not. So, life is very interesting with that racial category where I live in an all Black world. And so I'm always kind of navigating my identity, and I'm very aware of it because of where I am. So, I hope that this has helped you a little bit with, I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. I hope that this has helped you a little bit with thinking about racial identity development and why racial identities are important and identities in general, how we go through processes of developing our identities. And for me, some of the categories worked for me and did match my experiences. Others didn't. I feel like I didn't go through all of the categories. And then some of them were a little bit different for me than they may be for other people who are white. I've had most white people live in very segregated, very white worlds where you look at their networks of friends and who they spend their birthdays and holidays with. and entertainment with, it tends to be other white people. They can, even if you live in Alabama, you can spend all of your time with white people if you're white. You can't do that if you're a person of color. And so because of that, um you know uh I feel like my own racial identity has developed, in ways that are sometimes very different from other white people, and yet I have had to deal with and grapple with, why do I feel like I have to be exceptional? Like, am I presuming that other white people are not good? And is it really about good and bad? Where with most organized religions, they usually think about good and bad, that human beings have both. So there's not really groups of people that are good or bad. So white people wouldn't be bad or just good. And so why did I kind of struggle with what society was telling me about, if I understand that whites as a group have done a lot of violence against minoritized people. Am I ashamed of being white? Why would I feel that way? I have to be very intentional about thinking about that. So I feel like I kind of went back and forth with that for a while before I was able to kind of be accept that, this is me, this is my body, I'm white, and I'm good with that. I accept, my body, I'm good with it. I don't try to be black. I just try to be me and understand that I'm white, and there are, benefits that I get from just what group I was born into. And then, I have had the opportunity to get an education and various credentials and so on. And so I choose to live in a Black world, and I'm very grateful for the opportunities that I have, with a very welcoming neighborhood and community, where I do tend to be the only person who is white. But race is in my face all the time. And for most white people, it is not. Even though living in an all white neighborhood is a racial situation. So, some of the categories worked for me, some did not. And so, but I still can kind of make sense of how my life and situation and racial identity play for me as well as for other people. For example, for my husband, who regularly has to establish that he's competent, that he's a college graduate, simply by virtue of walking around in a Black male body. Many people have deficit notions about that. Um, so racial identity definitely matters. So thank you for listening, and I appreciate very much the time that I've had to spend with you. And good luck with you writing your own racial identity. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and stop this recording.